because this was some sort of topic that we were looking forward to talking about, and it was the stories, because we've all been in the paddock, and it was the stories that we've been in, and I've got a story, so I'll kick off, because obviously back in season 2, so we were talking about time, and that was season 2. I remember back at Donington testing that Hamlin and Andretti at that time, who are now obviously BMW Andretti, they couldn't get their season 2 powertrain out of the garage. It was literally stuck in there for the majority of the test, and then they went out for the final day of the test with the season 1 powertrain, because the season 2 powertrain basically wouldn't get off the ground, so they had to revert back to last season's powertrain. But it was a really interesting story, this one, because obviously, you know, they were the big story of testing. As a journalist, and as you'll see in Formula 1 testing, there's always that story. Remember going back to like McLaren and Honda and all that, all this with the car not working, and Williams, for example, last season with not being at testing. It's the big story. Every journalist is looking to try and find out what's going on with the big story. And Hamlin and Andretti, unfortunately for them, that was the big story. So it sort of started because I then sort of like popped in at that time, and Chris will remember that we could just pop into the garage and actually ask the team principals, like mechanics, what was going on. And
those were the days, right?
Those were the days. I remember. Now you can't just walk in. They've all got their velvet ropes out. Back then there was no such thing as velvet ropes or boards that they would put up in front of in F1. So I went into the garage, and obviously I spoke to team members, and they sort of told me situations, and but then I was told to come back one day to the garage after testing, and they walked me through basically their problems and what they were trying to do to fix it. And that was fine. I was like, great, that's fine. I'm very happy for that. So obviously then after testing, after the end of that day, I went to the garage. I opened the garage door, knocked on the door, opened the door, and then I sort of peered my head in, and no one was there. It was empty. There was only 2 mechanics working on the car, and the press officer was just in the corner finishing up some emails. So I went up to the 2 mechanics. I was like, boys, is there someone around that I could talk to about, obviously, the powertrain and what's been going on? They went, sorry, mate, there's no one here. They've all gone home, so you'll have to talk to us tomorrow, probably. I was like, all right, no worries. And then all of a sudden, the press officer, who's really lovely, and I'm not going to name anyone, but at the same thing, she just came at me, and I was like, whoa. She was like, oh, this is really unprofessional that you keep coming in and trying to talk and trying to find out and snoop. And I was like, I'm just trying to, do my job, essentially. Like, just find a story about what's actually going on. And I was just getting this, I was basically getting told off for coming to the garage and snooping, basically, and trying to find out what the story is. And I was like, whoa. And it sort of goes back to season 1, because I had an interview arranged with Andretti at the time, and it didn't go through on that day. And then I spoke to the person I wanted to speak to later that day, and that got thrown back at me at testing because I did that. And in my head, I didn't say it, but in my head I was like, but I had an interview arranged with that person during that day. And I was like, so when I saw him, I thought I explained the situation and said, I was supposed to have an interview with you at 1:00. It didn't happen because, things happen. I understand that things change on a race day. Is it okay if we can do it now? And we did. We had a great interview. But then because obviously they were having those problems and so forth, and then you've got me snooping around with other journalists, obviously trying to find out the story as well. And I think the frustration obviously boiled up, and everything that was going on with that team at the time, and obviously the frustration of not getting the car out, I think it just boiled over, and boom. There you go, I sort of got a big telling off. But at the same time, I was like, I was only doing my job. But yeah, that was my interesting story from the paddock. I've got loads more, and I'm sure I'll go into them at some point.
See, Jack, this is the thing for me, having been in journalism and now working in PR, is that I can totally sympathise with both sides of that story, because you are both just doing your jobs, and it's painful sometimes.
Oh. Yeah, I know. It's just the way it is, I suppose. I understand their side. Obviously, it's not a great story. Your brand, your company, your race team cannot get your car out of the garage, and you've had to revert to the season 1 powertrain while everyone else is loving their season 2 powertrain, and you're stuck in last year's technology. It's not a great look. I understood that, but at the same time, I was trying to be positive. I was trying to be like, what are you trying to do to fix it? How can you get this car out? How hard are the team working? Give me some positive energy. to sort of combat the bad story, but they just weren't having it.
Do you know what's hilarious? If we would have been more focused on Trulli if they were actually like at the track.
Yeah, they weren't there.
They were okay. Technically, they were.
They did turn up
because one. Do you remember it was back when all the teams were based at Donington, apart from like one of them, I think. So all they had to do was push the car out of the factory, across the car park, and then into the garage. It took like 5 minutes, and so technically they were at Donington, but they weren't in the garage for like 3 days. But more than that, it was, oh god, you had 6 days of testing back then, didn't you? So they didn't turn up until the final day at all.
Yes. But crazy times that they were.